On the morning of June 9th, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, Obergefreiter Hans Weber sat on the dirt floor of a temporary holding pen near Utah Beach, watching American soldiers unload crates from a supply truck 40 yards away. Weber was 22 years old, 709th Infantry Division, captured during the Allied advance inland from the beaches. He had not eaten in 37 hours. His last meal had been half a tin of sardines and a piece of black bread he had shared with 2 other men in a bunker that no longer existed. The American soldiers were opening the crates. Weber could smell something he had not smelled in months. Fresh bread. Not the dense, bitter Kriegsbrot that turned to paste in your mouth. Not the sawdust extended loaves that came in supply drops when supply drops still came. This was different. This smelled like the bread his mother used to bake in their kitchen in Heidelberg before the war, before rationing, before everything became a calculation of calories and survival. One of the American soldiers walked toward the holding pen, carrying a wooden crate. Weber and the 30 other German prisoners watched him approach. They had been told nothing since their capture. No information about where they were going, what would happen to them, whether they would be shot or shipped to England, or left to sit in this pen until they died of exposure. The soldier reached the fence. He was young, maybe 19, with corporal stripes on his sleeve. He set the crate down and opened it. Inside were tin plates, the kind you eat from in a field kitchen. The corporal started handing them through the fence, 1 plate per man. Weber took his plate and stared at it. The plate was clean. Not perfectly clean, but cleaner than any plate Weber had eaten from in the past year. In the Wehrmacht, you ate from whatever was available. Mess kits that had not been properly washed in weeks. Tin cans. Sometimes your hands. You did not complain because complaining accomplished nothing and wasted energy you could not afford to waste. The corporal walked back to the supply truck and returned with another crate. This one was heavier. He set it down and began ladling food onto each prisoner's plate as they held them through the fence. Weber watched the men ahead of him receive their portions. He tried to identify what was being served, but the angle was wrong, and the sunlight made it difficult to see clearly. When his turn came, the corporal ladled a large scoop of something onto his plate, then added 2 more items beside it. Weber pulled the plate back through the fence and looked down at what he had been given. Beef stew, thick, with visible chunks of meat and potatoes and carrots, a portion large enough that it covered half the plate. Beside the stew, 2 slices of white bread with a pat of butter wrapped in waxed paper. And on the other side of the plate, a small tin cup filled with coffee. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute or roasted grain mixture the Wehrmacht had been using since 1942. Weber stared at the food for nearly 30 seconds before he realized he was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down his face, while he held a plate of food that represented more calories than he had consumed in the past 3 days combined. The man next to him, a private from the 352nd Infantry Division, was eating so fast he was choking. Another man was eating the butter straight from the paper, not even putting it on the bread first, just consuming it as quickly as possible before someone could take it away. Weber forced himself to eat slowly. He had seen men die from eating too fast after prolonged hunger. The body forgets how to process food when it has been deprived for too long. You have to reintroduce nutrition carefully, or your stomach will reject it violently and you will lose everything you just consumed. He ate 1 small bite of stew, chewed it completely, swallowed, waited 10 seconds. Another bite. The beef was real. Not horse meat. Not the mystery meat that came in Wehrmacht rations that no one could identify. This was beef, seasoned with something he could not name, but recognized as the kind of seasoning that required resources and time and a supply chain that was not actively collapsing. After finishing half the stew, Weber tried the bread. It was soft. White bread made from real wheat flour, not the dark, heavy bread mixed with potato flour, and whatever else could be ground into something resembling flour, when actual wheat became a luxury reserved for U-boat crews and SS officers. The butter was real butter. Not margarine, not the synthetic fat compounds that came in ration tins, but actual butter made from milk that came from cows that apparently still existed somewhere in a world where cows were not being slaughtered en masse to feed an army that was losing on every front. Weber drank the coffee. It was hot, slightly bitter, and it tasted like coffee was supposed to taste. Not burnt grain, not roasted acorns. Coffee. He had not tasted real coffee since 1943, and even then it had been a half cup shared between 4 men during a brief leave in France, before they shipped east to Russia, where coffee stopped existing entirely and you drank whatever hot liquid was available, and called it coffee, because calling it anything else would force you to acknowledge how completely everything had deteriorated. When Weber finished eating, he set his plate down and looked at the other prisoners. Most of them had finished already. Some were licking their plates. One man was crying openly, his shoulders shaking while he scraped the last remnants of stew from his tin with his finger. No one spoke. The American corporal returned and collected the plates. He did not say anything, did not ask if the food was acceptable, did not make any comment about the crying or the men who were still staring at their empty plates, as if more food might materialize if they looked hard enough. He just collected the plates, put them back in the crate, and walked away. 2 hours later, the prisoners were loaded onto trucks. They drove for most of the day, stopping twice for water and once for the men to relieve themselves under guard. By evening, they arrived at a larger holding facility somewhere in Normandy. Weber never learned the exact location. The facility was a former French military barracks that had been converted into a temporary POW processing center. Barbed wire fences, guard towers, rows of tents for housing. The prisoners were unloaded and divided into groups of 50. Weber's group was assigned to Tent 7. Inside the tent were cots, not straw on the ground, not wooden planks, but actual canvas cots with blankets. 1 blanket per man, American military issue, clean. Weber had not slept on a cot in 8 months. In Russia, you slept in whatever hole you could dig before the temperature dropped to lethal. In Normandy, before the invasion, you slept in bunkers or trenches or abandoned buildings that smelled like death, because they usually contained death in some form. But here, in a POW camp run by the army you had been shooting at 3 days ago, there were cots. At 1800 hours, guards directed the prisoners to a mess tent. Weber walked with his group across the compound and entered a tent large enough to hold 200 men. Inside were tables, benches, and a serving line staffed by American soldiers. The prisoners formed a line. Weber watched the men ahead of him receive food on segmented metal trays, the kind designed to keep different foods separate so nothing mixed together. When Weber reached the front of the line, a soldier placed a tray in front of him and began filling each section. Mashed potatoes in the first section, green beans in the second section, 2 pieces of fried chicken in the third section, a dinner roll with butter in the fourth section, and in the center, a small paper cup containing fruit cocktail, canned fruit, peaches, pears, cherries, and syrup. Weber had not eaten fruit in over a year. The soldier handed him the tray and pointed to the tables. Weber carried his tray to an empty spot on a bench and sat down. Around him, German prisoners were eating in silence, the same shocked silence from the morning. Some men ate quickly. Others ate slowly, but all of them ate with the focused intensity of people who understand that food is not guaranteed and must be consumed while available. Weber started with the chicken. The skin was crispy, seasoned with salt and pepper, and something else he could not identify. The meat underneath was tender, cooked all the way through, white meat that pulled apart easily when he bit into it. In the Wehrmacht, chicken was something officers ate. Enlisted men ate canned meat, dried sausage, black bread, and whatever could be foraged or stolen. Fresh chicken was a fantasy, something you remembered from home and tried not to think about, because thinking about it made everything worse. Weber ate both pieces of chicken, then moved to the mashed potatoes. They were real potatoes, mashed with milk and butter, smooth and creamy. Not the dehydrated potato powder that came in Wehrmacht rations. Not boiled potatoes with the skin still on, because there was no time or fuel to peel them properly. This was prepared food, made by someone who had time and ingredients and a functioning supply system. The green beans were canned but cooked with bacon, small pieces of bacon mixed throughout, giving flavor and fat content. The dinner roll was fresh, soft, still warm. Weber spread the butter on it and ate it in 4 bites, chewing slowly to make it last. Then he opened the fruit cocktail. The syrup was sweet, almost too sweet after months of eating nothing sweet at all. The fruit pieces were soft, packed in heavy syrup that tasted like sugar and preservation, and a country that had not spent the past 5 years converting every available resource into ammunition and death. Weber ate the fruit slowly, 1 piece at a time, letting each piece sit in his mouth before swallowing. When he finished, he drank the remaining syrup from the cup. After the meal, guards escorted the prisoners back to their tents. Weber lay on his cot and stared at the canvas ceiling. His stomach felt full for the first time in months. Not painfully full, not sick, just satisfied. The absence of constant hunger was disorienting. For the past year, hunger had been the baseline condition of existence. You were always hungry. You ate whatever was available, whenever it was available, and within an hour you were hungry again. Your body learned to function on inadequate nutrition, burning through reserves until there were no reserves left, and you started burning muscle tissue and cognitive function. But now, lying on a cot with a full stomach in a POW camp run by the people he had been trying to kill, Weber felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt safe. Not free, but safe. The next morning at 600 hours, guards woke the prisoners for breakfast. Weber walked with his group to the mess tent and received another segmented tray: scrambled eggs, 2 strips of bacon, toast with jam, and a cup of coffee. Real eggs, not powdered. Bacon cooked crispy. Toast made from white bread, spread with strawberry jam that was so sweet it made his teeth hurt. Weber ate everything on his tray, then returned to his tent and sat on his cot trying to process what was happening. In the Wehrmacht, breakfast was black bread and ersatz coffee, if there was breakfast at all. Often there was nothing until midday, and midday might be a tin of cold meat and a piece of hard biscuit. The idea of scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast was something from another life, a life before the war, when his father still ran the bakery, and food was something you took for granted because there was always more. That afternoon, a different kind of truck arrived at the camp. Red Cross markings on the side. Aid workers unloaded crates and set up tables near the administration building. Guards informed the prisoners that Red Cross packages were being distributed, 1 package per man. Weber had heard about Red Cross packages from other soldiers, men who had been captured in North Africa or Italy, and later exchanged. They described the packages as containing luxuries, items that seemed impossible given the conditions of war: chocolate, cigarettes, canned milk, soap. Weber assumed they were exaggerating. When his turn came, an aid worker handed him a cardboard box, approximately 12 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches deep. The box was stamped with Red Cross symbols and shipping information. Weber carried the box back to his tent and opened it on his cot. Inside were items arranged in tight packaging: 1 pack of 20 cigarettes, 1 bar of chocolate, 4 ounces, 1 tin of condensed milk, 1 tin of corned beef, 1 tin of cheese, 1 package of biscuits, 1 bar of soap, 1 package of prunes, 1 package of raisins, 1 tin of instant coffee. Weber stared at the contents for a long time. The chocolate bar alone represented more sugar than he had consumed in the past 6 months. The cigarettes were American brands, machine-rolled, perfect cylinders of tobacco wrapped in white paper. In the Wehrmacht, cigarettes were rationed at 5 per week if supply allowed, and they were usually harsh Russian tobacco rolled in newspaper because actual cigarette paper had become too valuable to waste on enlisted men. The soap was wrapped in paper, stamped with a manufacturer's label. Real soap made from fat and lye, not the gritty substitute soap that barely produced lather and left your skin feeling raw. Weber had not seen real soap since his last leave in Germany, and even then it had been his mother's soap, carefully rationed and used only for special occasions. He opened the chocolate bar and broke off 1 square. The chocolate was dark, slightly bitter, with a smooth texture that melted on his tongue. He ate 1 square and wrapped the rest back up, placing it carefully in his footlocker. The impulse to save food, to ration and preserve, was too deeply ingrained to ignore, even in a place where food appeared 3 times per day without fail. Over the next week, Weber began to understand the pattern. Breakfast at 600 hours, lunch at 1200 hours, dinner at 1800 hours. Every meal was 3 courses. Every meal contained meat, vegetables, bread, and something sweet. The portions were consistent, generous, and the quality never decreased. There were no days without food. No mornings where you woke up and were told supplies had not arrived, so breakfast was canceled. No afternoons where the field kitchen broke down, and there would be no hot meal until further notice. The food simply appeared, prepared by American soldiers in a field kitchen that operated with the mechanical efficiency of a system that had never been forced to improvise, or substitute, or make impossible decisions about who eats and who does not. Weber started talking to other prisoners during meals. The man who sat next to him most days was Unteroffizier Ernst Klein, 352nd Infantry Division, captured on June 7th near Omaha Beach. Klein had been in the Wehrmacht since 1940. He had fought in France, in Russia, in Italy, before being transferred to Normandy in early 1944. Klein spoke quietly, always watching the guards. But he spoke honestly in a way that men only speak when they have nothing left to lose. Klein told Weber about the rations in Russia, how the supply lines broke down completely during the winter of 1941. How men ate their leather boots when there was nothing else. How you learned to identify which parts of a horse were edible and which parts would make you sick. How the Soviet prisoners died by the thousands because the Wehrmacht did not have enough food for its own soldiers, let alone prisoners. How you stopped thinking of food as something that tasted good and started thinking of it purely as fuel, as the minimum number of calories required to stay alive one more day. Klein had been wounded twice in Russia, shrapnel in the leg, frostbite in both feet. He recovered in a field hospital where the doctors had no anesthetic, and the food was broth made from boiled bones. He was sent back to his unit after 3 weeks, because the army needed bodies on the line more than it needed fully healed soldiers. When Klein was transferred to France in 1944, he thought the food situation would improve. France had not been starved like Russia. The occupation had been relatively stable. Surely there would be better rations in France. But by 1944, the Atlantic Wall consumed everything. Every resource, every calorie, every ounce of fuel went toward building fortifications that everyone knew would not hold, but had to be built anyway, because orders were orders. The food in Normandy was barely better than Russia. Black bread, canned meat, ersatz coffee. Sometimes potatoes if the local supply could be requisitioned. Sometimes nothing at all, because Allied bombers had destroyed the supply depot, or the trucks never arrived, or the trains were bombed before they reached the coast. And now, sitting in an American POW camp, Klein ate 3 full meals per day and could not reconcile the contrast. He said it quietly, looking down at his tray of food, but he said it clearly enough that Weber heard every word. Our army is starving, truly starving. Men are eating grass and bark and anything that can be chewed and swallowed. And we are sitting here, eating fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and fruit cocktail like we are guests at a hotel. Weber did not respond because there was nothing to say. Klein was right. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. You spend years being told that the enemy is weak, that their supply lines are failing, that they cannot sustain their war effort. And then you are captured and you discover that the enemy has so much food, they can feed their prisoners better than your own army feeds its frontline soldiers. On June 18th, Weber and 200 other prisoners were transferred out of Normandy. They were loaded onto trucks, then onto a transport ship at Cherbourg. The ship crossed the English Channel to Southampton, where they were loaded onto trains. No one told them where they were going. The guards provided no information beyond basic commands. Sit here, do not talk, do not move. The train traveled for 2 days, through England, then onto another ship, then across the Atlantic. Weber had never been on a ship that large. It was a converted cargo vessel, fitted with bunks in the hold for transporting prisoners. The bunks were stacked 3 high, metal frames with canvas stretched across. Each prisoner was assigned a bunk and told to remain there unless directed otherwise. Meals were served twice per day on the ship. Breakfast was oatmeal with canned milk and sugar, bread with butter, and coffee. Dinner was stew with meat and vegetables, bread, and canned fruit. The portions were smaller than at the camp in Normandy, but still more substantial than anything Weber had eaten in the Wehrmacht. The ship docked in New York on July 2, 1944. Weber and the other prisoners were kept below deck while the ship unloaded. Through the portholes, Weber could see the harbor, the buildings, the scale of a city that had never been bombed. No ruins, no craters, no buildings with their facades blown off, exposing the interior rooms like a dollhouse. Everything intact, functional, illuminated. From the harbor, the prisoners were loaded onto trains again. This train had passenger cars, not cargo cars. Seats with cushions, windows that opened, guards at each end of the car. But no one chained to the seats or locked in cages. The train traveled south and west for 3 days. Through landscapes Weber had only seen in photographs, farmland that stretched to the horizon without a single bomb crater, towns with intact buildings and roads that were not churned into mud by tank treads, cities with lights at night, visible through the train windows. Impossible quantities of light, as if electricity was so abundant it could be wasted on illumination instead of being rationed for essential military infrastructure. The train stopped at a camp in Mississippi, Camp Como, a POW facility built specifically for housing German prisoners, captured in Europe and North Africa. The camp covered several hundred acres, surrounded by double fences topped with barbed wire, guard towers at each corner. Rows of wooden barracks painted white, a mess hall large enough to feed 1,000 men, an administration building, a hospital, a recreation area with a soccer field. Weber was processed through intake, medical examination, delousing, uniform exchange. The Wehrmacht uniform was taken and replaced with American work clothes, dyed with a large PW stenciled on the back. Prisoner of war. After processing, Weber was assigned to Barracks 12. Inside were rows of bunks, 2 high, with mattresses and pillows and 2 blankets per man. Footlockers at the end of each bunk for personal items. Windows with screens to keep out insects. A wood stove in the center for heating during winter. That evening, Weber walked with the other men from his barracks to the mess hall. The building was enormous, with long tables arranged in rows and a serving line at the far end. The prisoners lined up and moved through the serving line, each man receiving a segmented tray filled by American soldiers working the kitchen. Weber received mashed potatoes, roast beef with gravy, green peas, a dinner roll with butter, and a piece of apple pie. Apple pie, dessert. Not canned fruit, not a stale biscuit, but an actual slice of pie made with fresh apples and sugar and a flaky crust that crumbled when he pressed his fork into it. Weber sat at one of the long tables and ate his meal slowly, trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. Around him, other prisoners ate in silence or spoke in low voices. Some men seemed angry, resentful that they were being fed so well while their comrades in Germany suffered. Others seemed grateful, relieved to be alive and safe, and no longer responsible for killing or being killed. Weber felt neither angry nor grateful. He felt disoriented, unmoored, as if the fundamental rules of reality had changed, and no one had informed him of the new structure. After dinner, the prisoners were allowed to walk around the camp for 1 hour before lights out. Weber walked to the fence and looked out at the surrounding landscape. Farmland, trees, a dirt road leading away from the camp toward a small town visible in the distance. No ruins, no destruction, no signs of war except for the camp itself, and even the camp was clean and orderly, and maintained with the kind of attention to detail that required surplus resources and manpower. A guard walked past, rifle slung over his shoulder. The guard was young, maybe 18, chewing gum. He glanced at Weber but said nothing. The guard did not look afraid or tense or prepared for violence. He looked bored. Weber returned to his barracks and lay on his bunk. The mattress was thin, but softer than anything he had slept on in 2 years. The pillow smelled like detergent, clean and artificial. Outside, the camp was quiet. No artillery, No bombers overhead. No sirens or shouting or the distant sound of something exploding. Just crickets and the occasional voice of a guard making his rounds. Weber closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop processing the contrast. 3 meals per day, every meal with meat, every meal with bread, dessert at dinner, coffee with real sugar, clean clothes, medical care, beds, soap, Red Cross packages with chocolate and cigarettes. Meanwhile, in Germany, the cities were being bombed into rubble. The rations were being cut again and again until there was barely enough to survive. The army was collapsing on every front, retreating and regrouping and retreating again. Soldiers were eating whatever they could find, dying of malnutrition and disease and exhaustion. And here, in a prison camp in Mississippi, German prisoners were eating apple pie. Over the following weeks, Weber began to adapt to the routine of the camp. Wake at Oro 600 hours, breakfast at Oro 6:30, work detail from Oro 800 to 1200, lunch at 12:30, work detail from 1400 to 1700, dinner at 1800, free time until 2100, lights out at 2200. The work details varied. Some men were assigned to farm labor, working in the fields surrounding the camp, harvesting cotton or vegetables. Others worked in the camp itself, maintaining the grounds, repairing buildings, assisting in the kitchen. Weber was assigned to a carpentry detail, helping to build additional barracks as more prisoners arrived from Europe. The work was not difficult. 8 hours per day with a lunch break. Tools were provided, and the guards supervising the work were not harsh. If you worked at a reasonable pace and did not cause problems, the guards left you alone. If you finished your assigned task early, you could rest until the next task was assigned. There were no beatings, no punishments for working too slowly, no threats or intimidation. The contrast with the Wehrmacht was staggering. In the army, you worked until you collapsed or until the task was complete, whichever came first. If you collapsed, you were left where you fell unless you were blocking something important, in which case you were dragged aside and left to recover or die depending on your condition. Here, if you looked tired, the guards told you to take a break and drink water. Meals in the camp remained consistent. Breakfast was eggs or oatmeal or pancakes, always with bacon or sausage, toast, butter, jam, and coffee. Lunch was sandwiches or soup or stew, with bread and fruit. Dinner was meat, potatoes or rice, vegetables, bread, and dessert. Every single day. No variation in quality. No days where supplies ran short and portions were reduced. The food simply appeared, prepared by a kitchen staff that had access to unlimited ingredients and industrial-scale cooking equipment. Weber gained 15 pounds in the first 2 months. His face filled out. His ribs stopped being visible through his shirt. His energy levels increased. He stopped feeling cold all the time, stopped waking up with cramps in his legs from malnutrition. Other prisoners experienced the same transformation. Men who had arrived skeletal and hollow-eyed began to look human again. The camp had a hospital staffed by American doctors and German POW medics. Weber went to the hospital once for a persistent cough. The doctor examined him, diagnosed bronchitis, and prescribed medication. Real medication. Not aspirin or herbal tea, or being told to rest and hope it improved. The medication worked. The cough disappeared within a week. Weber tried to imagine what would have happened if he had developed bronchitis in the Wehrmacht. He would have been given nothing and told to continue working unless he became so sick he could not stand, at which point he would have been sent to a field hospital where the doctors had no medicine, and the primary treatment was waiting to see if you lived or died. The camp also had a library, books in German, donated by the Red Cross and various American organizations. Weber had not read a book since before the war. In the Wehrmacht, reading was a luxury you could not afford because all available light and time had to be dedicated to survival and following orders. But here, in the camp, there was time. Hours of time every day when you were not working and not eating and not sleeping. Time to read, to think, to remember that you were a human being with an interior life beyond the immediate requirements of staying alive. Weber read everything he could find: novels, history books, technical manuals, It did not matter what the subject was. The act of reading, of focusing on words and ideas instead of hunger and fear, was profoundly restorative. In September of 1944, new prisoners arrived from France, men captured during the Allied advance across Europe. They came off the trucks looking shocked and disoriented. The same expression Weber remembered from his own arrival. That evening, Weber sat next to one of the new arrivals in the mess hall. The man's name was Gefreiter Otto Becker, 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, captured near Nancy. Becker stared at his tray of food, roast pork, mashed potatoes, corn, bread, and chocolate pudding, and did not eat. Weber asked if he was all right. Becker shook his head. He said he could not eat this. He said it felt wrong. He said his unit had been surrounded for 4 days without resupply. They ate their emergency rations on the second day. On the third day, they ate nothing. On the fourth day, 2 men in his squad died from wounds that would not have been fatal if they had not been so weakened by hunger. And now, less than a week later, he was sitting in a prison camp eating roast pork and chocolate pudding. Becker said it felt like a betrayal, like he was dishonoring the men who had died by accepting food from the enemy who had killed them. Weber understood. He had felt the same way during his first week in the camp, but he told Becker what he had eventually realized. Refusing to eat would not bring back the dead. Starving yourself would not change the fact that the war was lost and Germany was being destroyed. The only rational response was to survive, to eat, to regain your strength, and to hope that when the war finally ended, there would be something left to return to. Becker ate his food, slowly, but he ate. By October, the camp population had grown to over 3,000 men. More barracks were built. More work details were organized. The routine remained the same. 3 meals per day, work, free time, sleep. Some prisoners tried to escape. Not many, but it happened. The guards caught most of them within a few hours. The punishment for attempted escape was 30 days in the camp stockade, a separate building where prisoners were held in individual cells with reduced rations. Even the reduced rations in the stockade were more food than Weber had eaten during most of his time in the Wehrmacht. In November, Red Cross inspectors visited the camp. They interviewed prisoners, examined the facilities, reviewed the food supplies and medical records. They filed a report stating that the camp met all requirements of the Geneva Convention and that prisoners were being treated humanely. Weber wondered if anyone in Germany would believe that report. If you told a soldier on the Eastern Front that German POWs in America were eating 3 full meals per day with meat and dessert, he would think you were lying or insane. The contrast was too extreme to be believable. Christmas of 1944 arrived. The camp administration organized a Christmas dinner for the prisoners. Roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, cranberry sauce, green beans, dinner rolls, and pumpkin pie. The mess hall was decorated with paper chains and drawings made by prisoners in the recreation program. There was no religious service because not all prisoners were religious, and the camp administration wanted to avoid conflicts. But the atmosphere was subdued and reflective. Men ate their Christmas dinner and thought about home, about families they had not seen in years, about cities that were being bombed into oblivion, about a war that everyone knew was lost, but continued anyway because no one in command had the courage to admit defeat. Weber ate his Christmas dinner and tried not to think about his family in Heidelberg, his mother, his father, his younger sister. He had not heard from them since before D-Day. Mail from Germany had stopped arriving months ago. He did not know if they were alive or dead, if their home still stood, if they had enough food to survive the winter. But he knew that he, a prisoner of war in a foreign country, was eating roast turkey and pumpkin pie on Christmas, while his family, if they were still alive, was eating whatever scraps could be found in a country that was collapsing under the weight of total war. The irony was not lost on him. Neither was the guilt. In January of 1945, the German offensive in the Ardennes failed. Everyone in the camp heard about it. The guards did not hide the news. Some of them seemed almost sympathetic when they told the prisoners that the last major German offensive had collapsed and the war would be over soon. Weber felt nothing when he heard the news. No sadness, no relief, just a hollow acknowledgement that the inevitable was finally arriving. By April, the war in Europe was in its final weeks. Prisoners arriving at the camp told stories of complete collapse. No food, no ammunition, no fuel. Cities burning, refugees fleeing in every direction. Soldiers surrendering en masse because fighting had become pointless. On May 8, 1945, the camp administration announced that Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. The prisoners were assembled in the main yard and informed that they would remain in the camp until arrangements could be made for repatriation. No timeline was provided. It could be months or years. Weber returned to his barracks and lay on his bunk. The war was over. He had survived. But survival felt less like victory and more like a suspended sentence. He did not know what he would return to. His family might be dead. His city might be ruins. His country was occupied, divided, destroyed. And he had spent the final year of the war eating 3 meals per day in a prison camp while Germany starved. Weber remained in Camp Como until March of 1946, nearly a year after the war ended. During that time, the routine never changed. 3 meals per day, work details, free time. The food never diminished in quality or quantity. Even after the war ended and there was no strategic reason to feed prisoners well, the meals continued. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, meat, bread, vegetables, dessert. When Weber finally boarded the ship back to Europe, he carried with him a single item from the camp, a bar of soap from his last Red Cross package. He kept it wrapped in paper in his pocket during the entire voyage across the Atlantic. When the ship docked in Bremen and the prisoners were processed through repatriation, Weber walked through the ruins of a city he barely recognized. Buildings reduced to hollow shells, streets filled with rubble. People digging through the debris looking for anything useful. Thin, desperate, hungry people who moved slowly because they did not have the energy to move quickly. Weber still had the soap in his pocket. He walked for 3 hours through the ruins until he found a woman sitting on a pile of bricks, crying. She was old, maybe 60, her clothes torn and filthy. Weber approached her and asked if she was all right. She looked up at him and said she had not eaten in 2 days. Weber reached into his pocket and pulled out the bar of soap. He handed it to her and said she could trade it for food. The woman stared at the soap as if it were a religious artifact. She thanked him, her voice breaking, and Weber walked away before she could say anything else. He walked through the ruins of Bremen toward Heidelberg, toward whatever remained of his family and his home and his life. And with every step, he thought about the meals he had eaten in Camp Como. 3 courses per meal, every single day, while Germany starved. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about men who survived impossible circumstances with dignity and courage. Real people, real experiences, real history. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Hans Weber's story does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.